The humid air of the Pacific night hung heavy, thick with the scent of jungle rot and distant gunfire. Deep within a fortified bunker on a forgotten island, a group of battle-hardened Japanese soldiers huddled around a crude radio receiver, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on their weary faces. They had been ordered to listen for enemy transmissions, expecting static or coded messages. Instead, a voice, clear and resonant, spoke in their own tongue, not of war, but of home, of families, of a world beyond their desperate struggle. A profound silence descended, heavier than any artillery barrage, as the impossible truth began to seep into their souls. This was not just a broadcast, it was an invasion of the mind, a whisper of a different reality that would shatter their resolve and redefine the very nature of conflict. The American psychological warfare machine had just begun its work, and the Pacific War would never be the same. The year was 1944, and the relentless American advance across the Pacific was a grinding, bloody reality. On the remote island of Peleliu, a Japanese garrison, numbering over 10,000 men, found itself increasingly isolated. Their supply lines, once tenuous, were now virtually non-existent, choked off by American naval and air superiority. The air was thick with the stench of death and the constant nerve-wracking thrum of distant naval bombardments. Days bled into weeks, marked by dwindling rations, rampant disease, and the gnawing certainty that their fate was sealed. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, a stoic officer from Kyushu, watched his men, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow, as they dug deeper into the coral rock, preparing for an inevitable final stand. The strategic situation was dire. The Imperial General Headquarters had long since written off these distant outposts, sacrificing them to buy time for the defense of the home islands. Yet, the soldiers, indoctrinated in the Bushido Code, were expected to fight to the last man, a grim testament to their unwavering loyalty and the rigid military doctrine that governed their lives. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the bustling, sun-drenched headquarters of the U.S., Army's psychological warfare branch, a different kind of battle was being waged. Major Arthur Vance, a former advertising executive with a keen understanding of human psychology, paced his office, a map of the Pacific plastered across one wall. Beside him, Captain David Chen, a Nisei linguist whose family had faced internment, meticulously reviewed translated Japanese newspapers. Their mission was audacious, to break the enemy's will to fight not with bullets, but with words. Initial skepticism from the military hierarchy had been palpable. Generals, accustomed to conventional warfare, viewed Psy-war as a soft science, a distraction from the hard realities of combat. "You want to talk them into surrendering?" General MacArthur was rumored to have scoffed, "We'll bomb them into surrendering." Yet, Vance and his dedicated team persisted. They argued that every Japanese soldier convinced to lay down his arms was an American life saved, a precious resource preserved. The human cost of island hopping was astronomical, and any method that could reduce casualties, even marginally, was worth exploring. The genesis of their fundamental challenge lay in understanding the deeply ingrained Japanese warrior ethos. Surrender was not merely dishonorable, it was unthinkable, a betrayal of emperor and family. To overcome this, their messages had to be carefully crafted, not as pleas for capitulation, but as appeals to reason, to the preservation of life for the sake of Japan's future, and to the inherent value of individual existence beyond the battlefield. The decision to launch a systematic broadcast campaign, despite the lingering doubts from higher command, was a testament to Vance's unwavering conviction and the growing desperation to find alternative solutions to the brutal attrition warfare. Radio technicians, often working under primitive conditions on newly secured islands, scrambled to set up powerful transmitters. These were not just machines, they were conduits for a new kind of weapon, one that targeted the mind rather than the body. The American perspective was one of innovation born from necessity. The Pacific Theater presented unique challenges, vast distances, fanatical resistance, and a cultural chasm that seemed insurmountable. Psychological operations, or PSYOPs, offered a way to bridge that chasm, to speak directly to the enemy, bypassing the rigid filters of their command structure. Vance envisioned a campaign that would systematically erode morale, sow doubt, and ultimately offer a path to survival that was not synonymous with dishonor. He believed that even the most hardened soldier harbored a desire for life, for family, for a future. Their broadcasts would tap into these universal human emotions, carefully weaving a narrative that contrasted the grim reality of their isolated garrisons with the possibility of a humane surrender. This was not about trickery, Vance insisted, but about presenting the truth in a way that resonated with the enemy's deepest fears and hopes. The determination to save lives through non-combat means became the driving force behind their efforts. Every message, every frequency adjustment, every hour spent translating and recording was imbued with this singular purpose. They understood the immense psychological toll of prolonged isolation and hopelessness. Their broadcasts would exploit this, not cruelly, but strategically, offering a lifeline where none seemed to exist. The American team, a diverse group of academics, linguists, and former media professionals, worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief in the power of information. They were pioneers in a new form of warfare, one that sought to win hearts and minds, even if those hearts and minds belonged to the enemy. The stage was set for an unprecedented confrontation, not on the beaches or in the jungles, but in the silent, unseen battlefield of the human spirit. The first whispers of this new war were about to reach the ears of men like Lieutenant Tanaka, poised to shatter their world. The strategic imperative to reduce casualties, both Allied and Japanese, fueled the relentless pursuit of effective psychological warfare tactics. The American High Command, initially skeptical, began to see the potential for these non-lethal methods to complement conventional military operations. The sheer scale of the Pacific conflict, with its vast distances and countless islands, demanded innovative approaches. The decision to invest heavily in radio broadcasting infrastructure and personnel was a calculated risk, but one that promised significant returns in terms of human lives and resources. The officers and technicians involved in this nascent field understood the profound responsibility they carried. They were not just transmitting signals, they were transmitting hope, doubt, and a different perspective into the minds of men who had been taught only to fight and die. This commitment to a more humane, albeit still strategic form of warfare, underscored the American pragmatism that sought efficiency even in the brutal crucible of war. The physical conditions for establishing the American radio stations were often as challenging as the combat itself. On newly captured islands like Saipan and Guam, amidst the lingering scent of cordite and the fresh scars of battle, engineers and technicians worked feverishly. They erected towering antenna arrays, often under the threat of lingering Japanese snipers or desperate counterattacks. Generators hummed ceaselessly, powering the massive transmitters that would project American voices across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles of open ocean. These makeshift studios, often little more than tents or hastily reinforced bunkers, became the nerve centers of this new psychological front. Meanwhile, in the darkness of countless Japanese garrisons, from the caves of Iwo Jima to the jungles of New Guinea, soldiers like Private Hiroshi Sato, a young conscript from a fishing village, would secretly tune their crude, scavenged receivers. The risk was immense. Being caught listening to enemy propaganda meant severe punishment, even execution. Yet the allure of information, any information beyond the official, often misleading pronouncements of their own command, was a powerful, irresistible force. The technical challenges were formidable. Frequency selection was critical, requiring constant adjustment to avoid jamming by Japanese signals or interference from atmospheric conditions. Signal strength had to be maximized to penetrate the thick jungle canopy and the reinforced bunkers where Japanese soldiers sought refuge. But perhaps the most crucial challenge was translation accuracy and cultural understanding. A single mistranslated word, a nuance missed, could render an entire broadcast ineffective or worse, counterproductive. American psychological warfare officers relied heavily on their Nisei linguists, Japanese Americans who understood not only the language, but also the intricate cultural codes and sensitivities. These Nisei soldiers, often viewed with suspicion by some within the American ranks, bore a double burden, proving their loyalty to America while simultaneously trying to understand and influence an enemy who shared their heritage. Their dedication was unwavering, their work often thankless, and their contribution invaluable. The human challenges extended to both sides of the airwaves. American operators, often former radio personalities or academics, worked long, grueling hours. They meticulously crafted messages, debated phrasing, and rehearsed delivery, striving for a tone that was authoritative yet empathetic, factual yet persuasive. They understood that their voices were reaching men on the brink of despair, and every word carried immense weight. For the Japanese soldiers, the challenge was internal. They were torn between their ingrained duty, their loyalty to the emperor, and the stark reality of their deteriorating situation. The broadcasts, often heard in hushed whispers in the dead of night, chipped away at their resolve, planting seeds of doubt that grew into gnawing questions. The fear of discovery was constant, but the hunger for truth, for a connection to a world beyond their immediate brutal existence, often outweighed the fear of punishment. The content of the broadcasts was carefully calibrated. They began with factual news of Japanese defeats, often citing specific locations and casualty figures that contrasted sharply with the official Japanese communiques of glorious victories. This factual discrepancy was designed to erode trust in their own command. Then came the more insidious yet profoundly effective messages, appeals from home. Recordings of Japanese wives, mothers, and children, often obtained from prisoners of war or intercepted mail, spoke of longing, of the desire for their loved ones to return, of the suffering back home. These were not direct calls to surrender, but powerful emotional anchors to a life beyond the battlefield. Finally, there were appeals to surrender, framed not as an act of cowardice, but as a pragmatic choice, a way to preserve one's life for the future of Japan, for the rebuilding of their nation. They promised humane treatment, food, and medical care, contrasting it with the starvation and disease rampant in isolated garrisons. The pressure and sacrifice on both sides were immense. American linguists, particularly the Nisei soldiers, risked their lives not only in combat zones, but also through the psychological toll of their work. They were speaking to their own people, urging them to abandon a cause they themselves had once been part of, or at least understood intimately. This internal conflict, coupled with the constant threat of enemy action, made their role uniquely demanding. For the Japanese soldiers, the broadcasts created an agonizing dilemma. To surrender was to betray everything they had been taught, to bring shame upon their families. Yet, to continue fighting meant certain death, often a slow and agonizing one, far from home. The power of information, delivered directly and consistently, forced them to confront a reality their commanders desperately tried to conceal. It was a battle for their minds, and the stakes were nothing less than their very souls. The themes that emerged from this innovative form of warfare were profound. Resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, both for the American operators and the Japanese listeners. The relentless pursuit of innovation to overcome seemingly insurmountable cultural and military barriers, and the undeniable power of information to shape perceptions and alter destinies. The cost of truth, however, was also evident. For the Americans, it meant pushing boundaries, risking lives, and challenging conventional military wisdom. For the Japanese, it meant confronting a brutal reality that shattered their worldview, forcing them to choose between honor and survival, between indoctrination and self-preservation. These broadcasts were not just static and voices. They were a psychological weapon, meticulously designed to dismantle the enemy's will from within, proving that sometimes the most effective weapon is not a bomb, but a whisper of truth carried on the airwaves, a truth that resonated deeply within the human spirit. As the American broadcasts intensified, a subtle but undeniable shift began to occur within the Japanese garrisons. Japanese command, initially dismissive of the enemy's childish tricks, started to notice alarming anomalies. Morale, already fragile due to relentless combat and dwindling supplies, plummeted further. Whispered conversations replaced the usual stoic silence, and soldiers, once unquestioning, began to openly question official reports. The stark contrast between the optimistic pronouncements from Imperial General Headquarters and the grim reality described by the American radio voices created a chasm of doubt. Officers reported instances of men becoming withdrawn, losing their fighting spirit, and even attempting to sabotage equipment to avoid combat. These were unprecedented behaviors in an army renowned for its unwavering discipline and fanatical devotion. The rigid structure of the Japanese military, designed to enforce absolute obedience, found itself ill-equipped to combat an enemy that attacked not the body, but the mind, sowing seeds of dissent and despair through the very air they breathed. The conflict of doctrines became glaringly apparent. Japanese military rigidity, steeped in centuries of warrior tradition and a fierce code of honor, was utterly unprepared for the psychological flexibility of the American approach. The Bushido Code, which glorified death in battle and condemned surrender as the ultimate disgrace, provided no framework for understanding or countering an enemy that offered a path to survival. American psychological warfare, by contrast, was pragmatic and adaptable, constantly refining its messages based on intelligence gathered from prisoners of war and intercepted communications. While Japanese commanders struggled to maintain a facade of invincibility, the Americans were dissecting the enemy's fears, hopes, and vulnerabilities. This fundamental difference in approach created a strategic asymmetry. One side fought with an unyielding, almost spiritual commitment to a single outcome, while the other employed a fluid, analytical strategy designed to exploit the very human desire for life and family. Enemy intelligence reports, initially dismissive, soon reflected a growing sense of confusion and alarm. How were the Americans penetrating the mental defenses of their soldiers? Reports from various islands detailed the discovery of crude radio receivers, often hidden in caves or dugouts, and the increasing difficulty in suppressing the enemy's insidious whispers. Japanese officers, trained to identify and counter conventional threats, found themselves facing an invisible enemy that spread doubt like a contagion. One intercepted report from a frustrated colonel on Bougainville lamented, "The enemy does not fight fair. They speak to our men of their homes, of their families, of the emperor's concern for their lives. It is a poison that weakens the spirit more effectively than any bullet." This admission underscored the profound impact of the broadcasts, revealing that the American strategy was indeed working, eroding the very foundation of Japanese military cohesion and morale from within. The impact was often personified in individual stories. Consider Captain Hiroshi Sato, a veteran of the China campaign, who stumbled upon a group of his men secretly listening to a broadcast. He was about to punish them severely when a familiar melody, a folk song from his own village, drifted from the receiver, followed by a voice speaking of the changing tides of war, of the futility of further sacrifice. He stood frozen, unable to move, the truth of the situation, stark and undeniable, washing over him. He could not unhear it. His rigid worldview, once absolute, began to crack. Similarly, a Japanese commander on a small, isolated atoll faced an inexplicable collapse in morale among his troops. Despite his impassioned speeches and threats of execution, men began to desert or simply refused to fight with their former ferocity. He could not comprehend the source of this erosion, unaware that the American voices, carried on the wind, had already won a battle for the hearts and minds of his soldiers. The operational validation of the American psychological warfare campaign came with a shocking, undeniable clarity. On a small, previously unyielding island outpost, after weeks of relentless American broadcasts promising humane treatment and a path to survival, a mass surrender occurred. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers, emaciated and broken, emerged from their fortifications, waving white flags. This was an unprecedented event in the Pacific Theater, where surrenders were rare and often individual acts of desperation. The sight shocked both sides. American troops, accustomed to fanatical resistance, were stunned by the sheer number of men who chose life over death. Japanese high command was horrified, viewing it as an unforgivable betrayal. This single event, widely reported by American intelligence, proved beyond a doubt the effectiveness of the radio campaign. It demonstrated that the psychological weapon, when wielded with precision and cultural understanding, could achieve what conventional arms often could not: the preservation of life and the acceleration of victory. The themes woven through this phase of the conflict were stark. Innovation as a weapon, proving that ingenuity could be as devastating as firepower. The profound cost of doctrinal arrogance, as the Japanese military's rigid adherence to outdated codes blinded them to new forms of warfare, and the striking contrast between rigidity and flexibility, highlighting the American pragmatism that sought solutions beyond conventional thinking. The American approach, rooted in an understanding of human nature and a willingness to adapt, ultimately proved superior to an enemy bound by an inflexible code. This operational validation transformed psychological warfare from a fringe concept into a crucial component of Allied strategy, demonstrating that the battle for the mind was as vital as the battle for territory. The whispers on the radio had become a roar, echoing across the Pacific, changing the course of individual lives and ultimately the war itself, proving the profound power of information. The war's end brought with it a reckoning, and the quantifiable impact of the American psychological warfare broadcasts became undeniably clear. While precise figures are always debated, conservative estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers surrendered directly or indirectly due to the influence of these radio messages. This translated into a significant reduction in casualties for both sides. For the Allies, it meant fewer lives lost in costly assaults on heavily fortified positions. For the Japanese, it meant that many who would have otherwise perished in suicidal charges or from starvation and disease were instead taken as prisoners, their lives preserved. The transformation of psychological warfare from a nascent, often ridiculed concept into a validated, indispensable tool of modern conflict was complete. The broadcasts had proven that information, when strategically deployed and culturally sensitive, could be as potent a weapon as any bomb or bullet, fundamentally altering the calculus of war and validating its role in achieving strategic objectives with reduced human cost. The lasting consequences of this innovative approach were profound. Psychological warfare, once a peripheral activity, became a core component of military strategy, influencing doctrines and operations in subsequent conflicts. The validation of information as a weapon, capable of eroding enemy morale and fostering surrender, reshaped how nations approach conflict resolution and peace-building efforts. The lessons learned in the Pacific, particularly regarding the importance of cultural understanding and accurate translation, became foundational principles for future PSYOPs campaigns. The American spirit of innovation, born from the desperation of a brutal war, had not only saved lives, but had also forged a new frontier in military science. This legacy extended beyond the battlefield, influencing public diplomacy and international communication strategies, demonstrating the enduring power of narrative and persuasion in shaping global events. A testament to the foresight of those who championed these unconventional methods. The fate of the protagonists involved in this unique chapter of the war varied greatly. Many of the American psychological warfare officers, like Major Vance, continued their careers in public service or returned to their civilian professions, forever marked by their pioneering work. Their contributions, often unsung, laid the groundwork for future generations of strategic communicators. The Nisei soldiers, who served as linguists and cultural bridges, returned to a nation that slowly began to acknowledge their immense sacrifice and loyalty, often overcoming lingering prejudice. For the Japanese soldiers who surrendered, their lives were irrevocably altered. Many faced initial shame and ostracization upon their eventual return to Japan, but a significant number became instrumental in the post-war reconstruction, their survival allowing them to contribute to a new, peaceful Japan. Their stories, once whispered in the dark, became testaments to the human capacity for adaptation and the profound impact of a choice for life over death. The themes that resonate from this period are powerful. The legacy of forgotten heroes, the linguists, technicians and strategists who fought a war of words, the enduring power of human innovation, demonstrating how ingenuity can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and the profound impact of the American spirit, characterized by pragmatism, adaptability, and a relentless pursuit of solutions that prioritized human life. This was not just about winning a war, it was about winning it smarter, with a deeper understanding of the human element. The broadcasts were a manifestation of this spirit, a testament to the belief that even in the darkest hours of conflict, there is always a path to a better outcome, a way to mitigate suffering and accelerate peace. The American approach proved that strategic empathy, combined with technological prowess, could yield extraordinary results, changing the very definition of victory. Final statistics, though difficult to ascertain with absolute precision, paint a compelling picture. It is estimated that between 10,000 and 20,000 Japanese soldiers surrendered directly as a result of American psychological warfare broadcasts, with many more indirectly influenced. This, in turn, is believed to have saved thousands of American lives by reducing the need for direct assaults on heavily defended positions. For instance, during the Okinawa campaign, surrender rates significantly increased after sustained broadcast efforts, contributing to a reduction in the projected casualty figures. The impact was not just in numbers, but in the psychological ripple effect across the entire theater, sowing doubt and weakening resolve. These figures underscore the immense value of non-kinetic warfare, demonstrating that the strategic application of information could achieve military objectives with a fraction of the human cost associated with conventional combat, a truly revolutionary concept for its time. In reflection, this chapter of World War II stands as a powerful testament to ordinary individuals doing extraordinary things. From the American officers who dared to challenge conventional wisdom, to the Nisei linguists who bridged cultural divides, to the Japanese soldiers who, in their darkest hour, chose life over death, innovation born from desperation truly changed history. The story of the American broadcasts is not merely a footnote in military history. It is a central narrative about the evolving nature of conflict, the enduring power of communication, and the profound impact of human ingenuity when confronted with the most brutal realities. It reminds us that even amidst the chaos and destruction of war, the human spirit's capacity for hope, reason, and survival can be reached, and that sometimes the quietest voices can be the most powerful weapons of all. echoing across time and transforming the very fabric of human conflict. If this untold story of ingenuity, courage, and the power of information resonated with you, imagine the other hidden narratives waiting to be unearthed. Join our community of history enthusiasts, subscribe to our channel for more compelling insights into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. Your engagement truly fuels our mission to bring these vital stories to light. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What other aspects of W history intrigue you? Let's explore the past together.